Hey guys, Grand J here, and today we're doing the second part for our Mono Water deck video. Today's video is about the general instructions, the metagame, the matchups for this deck, and how to really get more out of the deck and really learn the internal strategy. If you haven't seen the first video, definitely go check it out. There's a link in the description below, and there's one on the screen. So that video we talk about the deck list and the general overall strategy of the deck. But this video is really to help you get the most out of your deck and to really learn how to play the deck well. In today's video, we'll be going over the general instructions, we'll be looking at the metagame, we'll be looking at matchups, and just how to really play the deck effectively. So let's get started. So let's start with opening hand and mulligan strategy. So in most cases, your ideal hand is an Artemisian plus a knight. You want to get a 2-cost knight into your discard or your break zone as soon as possible so that when you play Lenna later on, you've already got a knight prepared for you. Artemisian is pretty much the only card that you are needing to mulligan for, because Artemisian basically means that after you put this backup down, so you do need to get a 2-cost backup down on your first turn. Artemisian is just an ideal way to do that. You're able to put it down really cheaply, and then you can selectively choose which cards in your hand you wish to keep, and then put all the cards that you wish to play a little bit later on. For example, Light Zidane, such as Light Zidane, Garnet, Lenna. Put these down into the bottom of your deck so you can search them out with STEINER and other things a little bit later on in the game. So yeah, alternatively, any hand with two-cost backups is also good. It means that you're guaranteed to have a decent round for the first couple of turns. If you don't have any 2-cost backups, I would highly recommend you mulligan. And any situation where you're in where you have 2 Light Zidanes in hand is also a mulligan situation as well. Light Zidanes do clutter up your hand, so you want to try to mulligan any situations where you do have 2 or more in hand. You really don't want to be held back. So you put them away, draw a new hand, and you'll probably get a 2 CP backup, and then just play from there. In terms of general strategy for the game, this deck really is a deck that reflects how you play against your opponent. So if you're playing against a faster deck, you want to speed up your play. Against a slower deck, you want to slow down your play. My general mentality for this deck is you want to play the speed that your opponent's playing, but a little bit slower. So if your opponent is playing an aggressive deck, you want to be able to match their aggression, speed up your plays, but match it with a little bit more resource generation, so you've got a better, longer game. Against more slower decks, you can slow down your play and really focus on having more efficiency, discarding minimal cards, and building a good backup line before sending in forwards. That being said, taking first or second either is fine, but generally if you are against an aggressive deck, you want to take first, and against a slower deck, taking second is fine. In terms of your first couple of turns, you want to get 1 to 2 backups down on your first turn. This will depend on whether you're going first or second. If you're going first, you'll probably want to put 1 backup down and you're done. You don't want to discard too many cards, especially considering if you're going first, you don't have a lot of cards to play with anyways. If you're going second, you can play 2 backups as well. I generally wouldn't recommend playing 2 backups on your first turn, simply because you tend to discard a lot of cards that you might need later on in the game. The only reasoning I would give to playing 2 backups on your first turn is if you have 2 odd-costed cards that are cheap that you want to play on your next turn. 2 backups down your first turn is great if you then follow up next turn with a Waka and then a Fame Mimic Go-Go. It means that you can get a 3-cost backup in, and you still have that 1 CP that you can use effectively as well. So in general, 1 2-cost backup is fine. If you have multiple odd-cost backups that you want to follow up on, then getting 2 backups down is also good. So yeah, so if in the early game, if your opponent is playing aggressively, you can slow down your opponent's aggression by playing a cheap Fame Mimic Go-Go or a Cagnazzo. They're really quite good blockers, and they're really quite good value as well. Taking damage early on for this deck actually is fine because you have so many EX bursts. So EX burst is a resistance that your opponent has to deal with, especially when they're playing aggressive. If your opponent starts discarding a whole lot of cards, put their forwards into play, and your EX burst is sending them back to hand, they're wasting a lot of resources to deal you some damage, but they're then needing to play their forwards again, so they're having to discard more cards. So EX bursts work in your favor. You don't need to play as aggressively. That's why you can play slightly slower than the aggressive deck, and you'll still be fine. The goal of the deck, you really want by your third turn to have 3 backups down. 3 backups is really ideally where you want to be, because there's a lot of odd-costed cards in this deck, and a lot of them will net you cards, but you don't want to be discarding 2 cards for them. You don't want to be in a situation where you want to discard 2 cards for STEINER. You really want to be in a situation where you're playing STEINER with 3 backups and able to discard a card from hand. So yeah, so when you do get to the point where you have 3 backups down, play STEINER or play Zidane. If you don't have STEINER available, and if you don't have the ability to play a cheap Zidane, playing for free CP is fine to draw you a card and to get you sort of more more resources. Alternatively, playing Ash, if you're against lightning or fire, is also very relevant as well. There's a lot of things that you can play at free CP to sort of like stop your opponent's aggression or to build your presence forward. When you're playing Steiner, typically the order of targets that I would grab would be Ico, then Mog 9 if you have free CP, or like Mog 9 only if you already have Ico out, and then alternatively then you grab Garnet and then Zidane. This deck runs free light Zidane, so it does mean we're in a situation where we don't have to social Zidane too often. He will pop up as we play the game. And yeah, so like you typically don't social Zidane, he'll pop up. Grabbing an Artemishion's fine as well. So if you already got Artemission down, you can grab another one if you just want another blue card to discard for CP. Typically the way I see it, if you have free backups down and you don't have a Zidane, a good idea is to grab Icos, and then on your following turn with your free backups, you can discard a card, dull one backup, put Ico into play, and then grab a light Zidane, use your remaining 2 CP to put the light Zidane in without discarding a card. So that's like something that I do quite frequently. In regards to the Zidane, we typically use him to draw cards until we get up to 4 backups. So in the early game, you really want to get those extra resources so you can put your backups down, so you have a good resource line. As soon as you get that resource line, you can start using Zidane more aggressively to force your opponent to discard cards from your hand. That being said, there are situations in the mid to early game, if your opponent has discarded a lot of cards and they have a very low amount of cards in hand, they don't have a good backup line, then you can play Zidane to discard cards from your opponent's hand to really cut down their resources even more. So after you've built a bit of a board presence, when you've already got 1 or 2 forwards, the mid game is where you start pushing for more damage. This is where you get to play some of your more aggressive threats, such as Garnet, such as Tidus. Garnet is great. You can play her down. She's cheap. She's really versatile. She can buff your forwards, and she makes your summons cheaper. So she's really good. Her main value comes significantly more when you already have a decent board. So when you have 2 forwards, usually like a Steiner Zidane, you can follow up with a Garnet later on, and then she is able to push your 7k Zidane and possibly your 8k Steiner up to a higher level to get through your opponent's defenses as well. In regards to Garnet, she is a high priority target, so your opponent will be trying to focus on removing her as much as possible. They can't use summons to target her, but there are a lot of abilities that will be targeting her. Examples include Alcid Onionite combo from Lightning and Raban typically from Earth. So against Earth, it's really important for you to have buffs or removal ready to stop Raban from hurting you too much. But yeah, she's a high priority target, and as long as you have like a scholar or some way to protect her, she's going to be safe. Your opponent's going to prioritize her very heavily. In regards to Tidus Legend is probably one of the hardest cards to play for water, simply because he's such a skill-intensive character. Usually he's going to be a forward sitting around the 9 to 10k mark, but definitely if your board is a little bit stronger, he can definitely reach higher in the 11k mark and so on. So he's a really difficult forward to play because he is somewhat fragile, but the pressure that he puts on your opponent is actually really strong. Most people think that his main value is to blitz ace. This is actually incorrect. Most of the time, Tidus' ability is all about using him for offense and defense. He will be the biggest forward that you have by quite a margin. His base power isn't great, but he gets significant buffs, and Water is able to put a lot of forwards out. So he's great on offense and great on defense, in the regard that he's got the pretty much the strongest power of all your forwards. The big issue with him is that if you attack with him, all of a sudden you don't have him available for defense. So using Tidus is all about using him in conjunction with Astrologian. You want to attack with your Tidus. Typically your opponent is going to chump block with their smallest guy because they can't deal with Tidus, or they're going to let Tidus through. And then if your opponent tries to attack back, you always have Astrologian to reactivate him and use him for defense. This is how you use Tidus. You use him as a big sword and also a big shield in combination with Astrologian. In addition, yeah, you always have the very minute chance of using Blitz Ace to sort of clear out your opponent's defenses. There are situations where if your opponent doesn't have a good defense, you can use a Leviathan or some way to bounce or remove their defending forward, and then use Blitz Ace to clear through for, say, 3 or 4 or more damage in one turn, potentially end the game in one turn. So that's always a very relevant option for Tidus. And yeah, when you do have those situations and you have an opportunity to clear your opponent's defenses and go in, this is when you go in. Yeah, definitely it's a hard ability to use, and this is what really differentiates the sort of average novice water players from being like a high level, significantly better player. Against certain opponents that are a little bit more mindful about themselves, the fact that he always has the threat of being able to blitz ace often scares a lot of better players off him, because better players will not be willing to trade damage with you so much, simply because that might mean Tidus is able to lethal them on their next turn and they don't have defense set up. Oftentimes, you won't have Tidus's Blitz Ace ready to go, but the simple fact that you could threaten it makes your opponent have to doubt themselves. So this is sort of like the hidden mental game that Tidus provides to the table. And it's sort of something that's really hard to gauge if you're not sort of focusing on your opponent's mentality and how they're playing their deck. Something that's also really important to note is that Tidus is it's really important to have Minwu while you have Tidus out. Simply because in a situation where where your opponent is low on damage and you're able to use Blitz Ace to hit them 3, 4, 5 times, your opponent is going to have to use their forwards to block your Tidus until he's able to get through lethal. If you don't have Minwu out, typically you'll activate Blitz Ace, you'll attack, they'll then block with another guy, and then Tidus will be weak enough to die. So Tidus isn't significantly strong enough to a point where he can go through 2, say 6 or 7k forwards. So it's really important that you have Minwu, so every time he goes over a forward, he doesn't take any damage and you're able to continue Blitz AC. So this is really important. If you are in a situation where you have Tidus down, he's much, much, much stronger when you have a Minwu out to protect him. And yeah, there's always a very narrow situation of where you're significantly behind in damage and you can just use it to instantly swing the game back. Another important thing about Tidus is that water tends to draw its cards out really quickly, so your games are going to be a little bit shorter than if you were to play another deck such as wind or earth, etc. And this is kind of a disadvantage of water, and so it's also really important to also have Tidus available to be able to push for damage quickly when you do have an advantage. Water can definitely clear out blocks and defenders, and you need to take those opportunities to push through while you have the opportunity. Otherwise, you're almost certainly going to lose from deck out. In the mid to later game, this is where you typically play Lenna's down, so you don't want to pitch too many of her in the early game. You ideally want to try to have 2 of her available towards the mid to late game, and this is where she really shines. After you have 4 to 5 backups, you can use her to grab Knights, and if you have Walk on the field, Knight's going to be a 9,000 power forward, and Len's going to be 8,000 power forward with a potential to use her S ability as well. So she's really quite strong. I typically wait for my opponent to use one of their board wipes, because typically in the mid game, you will have a pretty solid field, and if you're playing your combat pumps right, you will be getting over their forwards. So against Earth, you'll probably be in a situation where you get over your opponent's forwards, and your opponent will have probably one mediocre forward to your FF9 team. And at this point, that's when they're going to Shantoda. And when they Shantoda you, they're going to have very few resources. They're not going to have another forward to play because they don't have the resources. And this is when you follow up with the Lenna. This is when you play the Lenna, get a Knight back. You can immediately, for 5 CP, build a pretty solid board, and your opponent has to deal with your aggression again, but this time they don't have Shantoda to back them up again. So Lenna is great after a field wipe, and then you play her and you can build up a pretty decent board pretty quickly. Definitely there are situations where you play Lenna early in the game, especially in those matchups where you're against something a little bit more aggressive. So in those situations, you use Lenna to pull out Fame Magogo, which is also great. It's like, he's definitely a solid forward, and he costs 1. So there are certain forwards that can't be blocked by higher cost forwards, and the fact that Fame Magogo only costs 1 is a huge advantage in his favor, simply because he's able to block those forwards that are able to sneak through damage. In addition to having Lenna in the mid to late game, you also have Cagnazor, and Cagnazor is deceptively strong in the sense that he seems like average powered to most players, but in the water deck, especially towards the mid to late game, he's extremely strong. Cagnazor is probably the strongest forward in the deck, by quite a huge margin, in the sense that if you do have your 3, 4, 5 backups, and you have 1 or 2 forwards in the field, playing him gives your opponent a huge -3, -4,000 power reduction, and that's definitely very strong. It generally means that all your opponent's forwards, except for their really, really big forwards, are going to be smaller than all your 7Ks or 8Ks. So Cagnazor is really strong. So in a situation where your opponent is behind on life, and you have, say, 2 forwards out and you have a couple backups down, you can play Cagnazor in the mid game, give all your opponents -3,000 power, and then attack through with your STEINER, and now you've got Cagnazor, which is a very good blocker, ready to block your opponent's aggression coming at you. So it's a very good high tempo play around the mid game. Towards the late game, he's like unbelievably strong, especially if you have like a Lenna and a Knight combo already on the field. And you have backups. He's just going to allow you to just crush your opponent's board or be able to push for damage. In addition to this, you can also use Scholar to return him to your hand and then play Cagnazor going on the same turn. So there are situations where you play Cagnazor, give all your opponent's guys -4,000 power, you Scholar, put him back to hand, you play him down, gives him another -4,000 power to your opponent's field, and in a lot of situations, that's just going to be able to clear out their board. So it is something that's like really late game. You do have to have a decent board, and you have to have quite a lot of backups, but as soon as you do get to that point, you can replay Cagnazor, force your opponent down, and just like win straight out from there. So yeah, so Cagnazzo is really strong. That being said, moving on to Scholar. Scholar is a very strong card in this deck simply because a lot of your abilities are enter-play abilities. So not only can you use it to protect your Garnet in situations where your opponent's targeting her out with an ability, but being able to use Scholar to return a Lenna to hand is very, very strong. To return Cagnazzo to hand is very strong. Being able to recur these really strong enter-play abilities is unbelievably strong. So that's why towards the mid-late game, after you've played a Lenna out, or after you play Cagnazzo out, you want to use them as a very strong way to defend. And if your opponent does have ways to get over your Lenna, do get over your Cagnazzo, you can always use Scholar to pull them out of the way, bring them back to hand so you don't lose your forward. And then again, next turn you just play them down again for a huge enter play ability. So Scholar is typically reserved for Lenna and Cagnazzo because it's unbelievably strong in those situations. Overall, the strategy of Water is to out-resource your opponent. You don't have to out-race your opponent too hard. Generally, you'll already have a pretty solid board, considering that you have a lot of good value mid-game forwards, such as Steiner, such as Zidane, such as Garner, such as Ash. So you'll be pushing forward with a lot of 7 or potentially 8Ks if you have Walker out. You don't need to play ultra aggressively. You want to also be building up your backline. So as soon as you have some sort of board control and you have decent numbers, you then focus on putting your backups down. You want to sort of be allocating both forwards and backups to the field, so you're developing your overall strategy. You will out-resource your opponent because simply because a lot of your cards just continue to give you more value, and then you're able to push forward. And that's what this deck is all about. It's about playing slightly more conservative or slightly more defensive or slightly more resource based than your opponent. You will be able to match their aggression, and as soon as you do get your resource base down and your economy up, you will be able to outscale them in the late game. So moving on to red flags and matchups. So let's start off with some of our easier matchups. So out of all the matchups I've played, I definitely feel that Lightning definitely seems to be the easiest for Mono Water to defeat. Simply because Minwoo is such a strong backup in that matchup. There's so many good abilities that that Lightning has that completely get completely stopped by a Minwoo. So yeah, just simply having a Minwoo down prevents your opponent from using their outside combo, and a lot of times it will prevent all the other sort of chip damage abilities, and it's just going to be able to protect your guys. Lightning also has a lot of mid-range forwards as well. They don't play a lot of higher-end guys. So your mid-range guys are going to be a little bit stronger than their guys because they're Outsid, they're Rigdier, they're Onion Knight, they're all at the 6k mark, and all your guys at the 7k mark. So you'll generally be able to outfight them. The only thing that you really have to worry about is Cyclops, but your opponent only has so many Cyclops in the deck, and your forwards are bringing value, but their forwards don't have nearly as much value. Pretty much the only forward you really have to worry about against Lightning is Gilgamesh, just because Gilgamesh has the ability to not be bounced. So you have to play careful around him. But if you can deal with him and just send forwards up and use combat pumps, the choo-choo lane is where you really want to be hitting Gilgamesh with. And so you'll be able to get over him. As soon as you get over him, you can just attack through for the rest of your forwards, and you're generally pretty safe. In this matchup, Garnet is really, really good, simply because your opponent isn't able to target it with Odin. So as long as you have a Minwoo down and you have Garnet on the field, it's really, really difficult for a Lightning deck to remove her because they don't have Odin available to target her. And as long as you're not attacking with her too aggressively, they can't Cyclops her. So she's really, really strong in this regard. She's going to be what really helps push you out over them. Also very relevant in this matchup is Ashe. So again, Ashe, I love this card. Every time she's chosen or targeted, she gets plus 3,000 power, and so that means even without Minwoo, there's situations where you just play her, and the Lightning deck just doesn't have good responses to her. They're not able to remove her. They have to play very, very, very aggressively, or go very deep in order to remove her. Or they have to have an Odin. If they don't have an Odin, then Ashe is going to be very strong. So typically in a lot of situations, if you play Garnet first, you want to play Garnet first, because when you play Garnet first, your opponent is going to pitch away to Odins, because they're not really going to want to Odin one of your Zidanes. They're going to realize that they don't have, Odin's not going to be a good target to deal with Garnet. They'll pitch your Odins, and as soon as they pitch your Odins, that's when it's safe to put an Ashe. Not only this, but Ashe is also great because you can reactivate herself. A lot of decks run Armon, so yeah, against Armon, you can just every time they dollar, you can always reactivate her, and she's always going to be bigger and stronger. So so this is definitely another card that's really good in the matchup. So another thing to take note is the Golbez matchup, which is fundamentally a Lightning deck with other colors splashed in. But Golbez is a very manageable matchup for you to deal with, simply because you have so many outs to deal with him. Leviathans will bounce him and hold him back, as well as Una H. If you have Una H, most Lightning decks will not be able to handle it, unless they're one of the few Lightning decks that also splash in Hecaton Cares, and they can play that by discarding Earth cards. But while you have Una H, you're significantly safer against Golbez. So Golbez isn't a very difficult matchup for you to deal with. You just have to play it slow. Even if Golbez comes out on turn 1 and starts dealing you some damage, you just like start setting up backups. They're not going to have too many other forwards to sort of deal with you, and always hold a Leviathan in hand ready. So you're going to be mulliganing hard for Leviathan or Una H. As soon as you see the Golbez come down, just hold the Leviathan. You don't have to Leviathan the Golbez back immediately. Golbez is going to attack you very slowly. It will just do one damage every turn, so you can let it wail on you for like 3 or 4 turns and you'll be fine. Hold the Leviathan in your hand. You want to hold the Leviathan in your hand because while Golbez is by himself, he's not dealing you a lot of damage. If he's attacking you, it also means you're allowed to, you can swing back with your forwards as well, so that's pretty safe. You want to hold the Leviathan in a situation where your opponent plays the leader. So your opponent's going to be frustrated because they cannot get their Golbez to break, so as soon as they use the leader to try to force him break, that's when you use Leviathan. Using a Leviathan in that situation sets your opponent back really bad. If you mulligan for Leviathan in hand, it's also very strong. If you have a Leviathan in hand and they go turn 2 Golbez the leader, if you Leviathan the Golbez in response to the Delete's effect, they are unbelievably behind because they have only Golbez in hand and the Delete on the field. So yeah, they have a 9,000 power forward on the field, but now they have to draw so many cards for so many turns and do nothing in order to get Golbez back onto the field. So yeah, it's a very manageable matchup, but always make sure you have enough resources to cast Leviathan in hand. As long as you do, even though you have to play a slower game or like discard more cards from your hand, as long as you have it available, it means that you can always bounce Golbez, and that's the biggest threat off the table pretty much all the time. The next easy matchup is probably Wind, and yeah, this is probably a very similar situation to Lightning in that Wind deals a lot of chip damage as well. So again, Minwu is going to be your best friend here, preventing your opponent from chipping up damage to you, such as through Valifor, such as through Balthier, such as through Y'shtola, is really good. So Minwu is definitely going to be a friend here. They're also a bit of a slower deck as well in that they also have to set up their backup. So this gives you breathing room. So yeah, this is how you allow yourself to build up a backup line. And in general, your forwards are going to be able to combat their forwards a little bit better unless they play Bartz. So Bartz is what you want to be saving your Chutulin targets for, because Leviathan is a terrible answer for Bartz because you Leviathan and they put it back down. So against Wind, you generally want to have your combat outs against Bartz, but generally, like, a lot of their forwards aren't going to be too strong or aren't going to be too well adapted to deal with your forwards, and you just have a lot more card advantage and pressure, so you'll be able to like pressure them out. Against some more aggressive Wind variants that play stuff like Chocobos, that play other aggressive cards, like I said, you want to match their aggression with your aggression as well. So you want to be able to match your aggression with your defense by playing more forwards, by discarding more cards early. And simply because you are building up a better backup base and your cards are giving you more cards or searching you for more forwards, you'll generally be alright. In addition, like I said, Fame Gogo is a 1-cost forward, and this is going to be the card that wins you this matchup simply because he is a 7,000 power forward and he costs 1, so he's going to be able to block any of those small forwards that leak through damage. Not to mention, Cagnazzo is extremely strong. You can use him to just ball wipe your opponent, deal a whole bunch of negative power to your opponent's smaller guys, and yeah, so not to mention, Cagnazzo is really strong in this matchup as well. He's able to block well, he's cheap, and he's able to remove some guys when he comes to play as well. So definitely, yeah, you have pretty good options for Wind matchups. Another thing to note is a lot of Wind matchups play Maria. So Maria, obviously, it's a very strong card. Everyone knows this. Hecaton Care is what you want to be saving. So against Wind, Hecaton Care is going to be a friend as well. You want to hold on to it. In other matchups, such as Water, for example, Hecaton Care is not going to be nearly as relevant. So you can pitch it early in case you sort of can't get the bits and pieces to play it. But against Wind, you want to hold on to it and then hit their Maria at those really right times when your opponent thinks that they're going to trade forwards with you or have a forward that's bigger than you. You just Hecaton their Maria, and that's a big swing in the sense that Maria costs more than other backups that give buffs, and Wind doesn't have a lot of other sort of backups to sort of help them out in those sort of combat situations as well. So being able to take out Maria is really good. Another thing to note against the Wind matchup is that they do have archers in their deck, so archers will be able to target out some of your 2 and 3 cost backups. Typically, Waka is going to be a big target, and Minwu is going to be a big target. So these are your backups that they're really going to be targeted with Archer. So in these matchups, don't discard your extra copies of these backups too early. So there will be times where I have 2 Wakas in hand. And typically, a lot of people, they'll just discard 1 copy of the backup, put the other copy into play. But against Wind, it's going to be in a situation where I will keep that extra copy in hand and discard another card from my hand. Even though this Waka in hand is redundant, I'm pretty confident at some stage Wind will use Archer to break your Waka, and that way you have another one available to play. You don't want to be left in a situation where you've discarded one, put one down, and then your opponent arches it, and then you're trying to dig through your deck for the next one. And it really feels bad moment if your opponent deals damage to you and puts a third copy into your damage zone. So that's a really feels bad moment. Don't discard your extra copy of your free cost backups. Keep them in hand, wait for the archers, and put out extra copies. Another thing to note with win matchups is always be careful of Sylph. There will be plenty of times where they will swing in like a 7,000 power forward. You don't block it because now that clears their forwards out, so you can attack in with say 2 or 3 7,000 power forwards. In that situation, they might be baiting you into a Sylph, so they'll be using Sylph, reactivate their forward, gives a plus 1,000, and it's able to block your 7,000 power forward attacking and be able to trade with the next guy if you do continue attacking. So definitely do be aware of Sylph, and there are certain times when your opponent has tells in this regard, so they'll purposely discard extra cards to keep like win backups open in order to do this. So definitely do keep this in mind. It's a tricky thing that win does have available for it. Another thing to note is that Knight is pretty good in this matchup in the sense that Barbarisha is being played in most win decks right now, and she's a really strong card. There's no reason why not to play her. When she comes into play, reduces a forward's power to 1,000, but Barbarisha only reduces their base power to 1,000. So if she is used on a Knight, then she reduces Knight's original power from 3,000 down to 1,000. But Knight still retains all its buffs from having backups, all its buffs from having Walker, and so on. So Knight is what you're going to be wanting to block your opponent's sort of small forwards with. So there will be times when like a wind player will attack with like the 3,000 power Pain, and yeah, you're wondering why, because you've got multiple 7,000 power backup, 7,000 power forwards. You block it, and then they follow up with the Barbarisha to kill your 7,000 power forward. So if you play a Knight and use a Knight to block it, Barbarisha doesn't have enough like power reduction to reduce your Knight to 0 to kill it. So this is another good thing to note. So when against wind and your opponent is going for what seems like a suicidal attack, use the Knight to block because it's resistant to Barbarisha follow-ups. So in regards to your even matchups, the first even matchup is Fire, which is kind of crazy because for a long time I sort of said that Fire was a weak matchup against Water, but actually after playing in sort of a wider metagame, I found that Fire has some interesting tools to deal with Water. And the main reason why Fire now has an even matchup, I believe, with Water is because of Legendary Vivi. So Legendary Vivi, when it comes into play, it's a free cost forward with 4,000 power, so it's small. But when it comes into play, it deals damage to a forward equal to 4,000 power plus 1,000 for each card in your opponent's hand. And so there are a lot of cards in Water that have 7,000 power. So this is like Zidane, Garnet, Steiners, etc., right? Now, the reason why this card is much more effective against Water is simply because Water tends to draw a lot of... Now, the reason why this is more effective against Water is because Water tends to draw a lot more cards than other colors. So when you do play Zidane, when you do play Steiner, you're usually sitting on quite a couple of extra cards in hand. And in this situation, all you need to be at is 3 cards or more in order for a Vivi to stop a Zidane, or stop a Steiner, or stop a Garnet. So, Vivi is really strong in this matchup, and this is probably the reason why I think Fire is now an even matchup with Water. Definitely the rest of Fire, definitely does have an uphill battle to deal with Water, especially when you have min moves and so on. But Vivi single-handedly is the biggest tool that Fire have available at their disposal. In addition to this, if you don't have Waka, Vivi's ongoing ability is unbelievably strong as well. In the sense that if you don't have Waka, all your forwards are going to be 7,000 power forwards, and Vivi's S ability is able to clear through all of them. There have definitely been times where I just haven't drawn into the Waka, and this Vivi has just kept me from playing a whole bunch of forwards, simply because I didn't want to like play a Lenna to get a Knight or to get a Fame and Gogo, because they'll all be 7,000 power forwards. Because the moment you're playing like a whole bunch of 7,000 power forwards, if your opponent has more Vivis in hand, they can use the S ability and clear out your entire board. It's a very like deceptive way to just get wiped out against a Vivi, because like they're holding the S threat. So this card single-handedly holds Water back so hard. Definitely like the priority against Fire is you want to get Walker in. As soon as you get Walker in, things are significantly easy for you because Vivi no longer poses a similar level of threat. At the same time, if you don't have Walker on the field and you are playing forwards, you want to play slightly more aggressively, get your cards down low. So there are times where I'll put a Steiner down and I won't follow up by discarding a card for Zidane, because then that will put me down to 2 cards. Simply because I don't want to be discarding too many cards early in the game when I'm on a low hand. But against Fire, that's what you need to do. You have to get the Steiner, get the Zidane out early, and discard extra cards for it. As soon as you get down to 2 cards, Vivi doesn't have enough juice to take him out. And that's where you really want to be at. continuing on other things that are relevant against fire is you need to be able to match their board, deal with their aggression. Simply because red mage is always going to be really dangerous to you. There will be tons of situations where your opponent will get to 5 or 6 life, and then they just use red mage to stop one of you guys from being able to block, and then they go in with the rest of their guys. So against fire, it's significantly more important to prioritize your life. You don't want to allow them to sneak in too much damage early on. I'd say pretty much stop at 3. Anything after that is where you got to start trading guys for life, because as soon as they get you down to a low life value, then the red mage just wins the game for them. You have to be spamming out dudes at that stage, and I would rather be in a situation where I still have a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more options to sort of work around my life, rather than being at that 5 or 6 life mark and red mage is just forcing you to just spam dudes down. So another even matchup, obviously, is the water-to-water matchup, because you're playing the same colors. In this matchup, it's really important for you to have Garnet available and to use Garnet to its maximum ability. She's really good as a defensive wall. There'll be plenty of times where water isn't able to get through their opponent's Garnet, simply because Garnet's immune to ability, immune to summon, so she can't be Leviathan or Choo-Choo Lane, and she's able to use summons to buff her up as she needs. In general, use Garnet as defensive wall. She's the best defensive wall you have in regards to, if you're going to block with a forward and then use combat pumps to win a fight, your opponent can't then use Leviathan to bounce your guy as a get out of jail free card, because Garnet can't be targeted. So in that regard, generally attack with Garnet last. She's your she's your attacker that you want to be safest with, and use her for defense because she's your best defender, because she's immune to summons. Of course, you don't want to be playing her by herself, because water does play fan for it. And so you want to obviously be pairing her up with a STEINER or a STEINER while you have them on board. And generally you're going to be playing Garnet while you have other forwards on board as well, because they're the ones that you're giving the buffs to in general. So, so keep her protected, and she'll significantly be stronger in this matchup. In addition to that, Cagnazzo is also very good in this matchup, simply because water doesn't play a huge amount of strong forwards. So Cagnazzo doesn't really need to put down a significant damage reduction in order for your forwards to be able to overcome them. Cagnazzo is really strong in that regard. There will be times where you can play Cagnazzo, Scholar Cagnazzo again to wipe your opponent's forwards out. So he's strong in that regard. Again, he's going to be very relevant in this matchup. Hecaton Care, again, is is relevant in this matchup simply because Knight is a thing. Knight, when you have 5 backups and you walk up down, it's 9,000 power. So if you have Garnet and you use Hecaton Care to hit your opponent's walker, all of a sudden your opponent's Knight drops from 9,000 to 7,000, which is like a huge swing. Not to mention, if you have Garnet out, you get plus 1,000 power as well. You want to be holding onto Hecatons and Garnets to hit walkers when your opponent thinks that it's safe to attack. So these are just little things that you can do in the matchup and what to prioritize. So moving on to the hard matchups. So again, one of the hard matchups for water to deal with is Ice. Simply because they have Zilera, the Death Seraph. It's a 4-cost summon that hits all dull 3, 5, 2, 7, etc., forwards, which is like 90% of your forwards. So obviously in this situation, you want to be prioritizing Tidus a little bit more, simply because he is unable to be destroyed with Zilera, the Death Seraph. In addition to this, you also have to attack more intelligently. Attacking with Ashe, attacking with Astrologian available is going to be very relevant to you. So when attacking, you want to be attacking with certain forwards that can reactivate and have Astrologian available, so your opponent can't use Zilera to remove them before the attack resolves. And this is really important in the water matchup. Otherwise, we definitely have a lot of tools to deal with the ice matchup in regards to having Astrologian, in regards to having Ashe. There's a lot of things that we can do to sort of counter them, but definitely you have to play smart. If you tap out your Astrologian too early, you don't have a response, so you definitely need to deal with this as well. For Heroic Yuna is also very relevant in this matchup, simply because a lot of ice decks, pretty much all ice decks, run Renault because she's such a strong forward. She gets buffs and she dulls all opponents forward when she does die. So having a Yuna Heroic down prevents her from being able to trigger this ability, and that's one of the biggest tools that ice has in order to getting over your opponent's forwards. So yeah, definitely these are things to take notice of while you're playing against the ice matchup. Always protect your Ashe. Don't use her for combat trades. Definitely use her for defense against smaller forwards such as Snow and so on. Always have water available to reactivate her if you can. Generally keep Astrologian active if you can as well. So discard extra cards to have Astrologian available, and then your opponent isn't able to really sort of capitalize on dulling your forwards and getting through. And moving on to the next hard matchup is Earth. So Earth definitely feels like it's the hardest to overcome with water, but it's slightly more manageable than Ice, in my opinion. The big reason why Earth seems like it's hard to deal with is because Earth can put down two big forwards, or generally a big forward and something else, very quickly. Generally, Earth, on their first turn or second turn, they'll be playing Yang Ursula or Vincent Yuffie. So that gives them a 9,000 power forward, and then like another forward to sort of like help out. So in that situation, you can't really allow them to sneak in too much damage, or you have to defend your board. You have to put a forward up to prevent that prevent that Ursula or prevent that Yuffie from sneaking in extra damage. So taking one hit every turn from a Vincent or Yang isn't too bad, but if you're not playing forwards and they're going to be attacking you with Yang, Ursula, or Vincent Yuffie, and that's going to add up the damage really, really quickly. So you need to be able to contest the board. So this is definitely one of those matchups where you want to be putting forwards out like as soon as possible to counter their aggression. You play a little bit slower, and this is the most important thing. You trade off some damage against Earth, but you also want to be defending against some damage. You want to be preventing their smaller guys from being able to attack through and allowing their bigger guys to attack through. And they have to fight through your EX burst, so there will be times where the big guy attacks, you get an EX burst, and that gives you additional advantage and allows you to build your backups and build up your resources. Earth burns through its resources really quickly, doesn't have a lot of draw power, and doesn't have a lot of search. Generally, its only search is in terms of Jesse, so there's not a lot of ways for Earth to really sort of build up its resources very quickly. And they run a lot of monks, so a lot of versions of the deck run like 6 monks. And monks, while strong, sometimes it's relevant to force your opponent to use monk to win a fight, simply because monk is actually really expensive. So it's a 2-cost backup, and then in order for your opponent to use the monk that gives 3,000 power, they have to like spend two Earth, or in most cases they'll be discarding a card and breaking a backup. So it's actually a really expensive backup to use. There are sometimes certain situations where it's okay to block your opponent's Vincent with an equally powered forward, and then knowing that they're going to use monk, simply because by breaking the monk, they discard a card from their hand and they waste the backup as well. So sometimes you have to like trade your board for their resources to buy enough time to sort of build up your resources so you can build up a board. So this is definitely a hard matchup to navigate, but it's manageable when you know how to deal with the matchup as well. So against Vincent or Yang, you want to be using your bounces or your Leviathans to bounce back the big forward. So Yang and Vincent are the strong forwards. So if you bounce them or remove them from the field, then all of a sudden Yuffie or Ursula are significantly weaker threats, and only 7,000 powers is going to be able to deal with them. So and they're generally discarding a lot of cards to put these 4-cost forwards into play. So this is another very relevant thing. You just use Leviathans and use units to get their big forwards off the field, give you some breathing space, some time to respond, and they're just going to be significantly behind on resources. As long as you're building resources a little bit faster than your opponent, you'll be fine. And something to really note is, because Garnet can't be chosen by summons, she is going to be a high priority target for Raubans. Garnet is at 7,000 power, and it's very easy for her to get bigger, and it's very easy for her to debuff opponent forward. So I swear to God, it seems like 90% of the time, the moment you put a Garnet down, your opponent's just going to Rauban it straight away. So only put Garnet down if you have a Leviathan in hand, because you'll put a Garnet down 90% of the time, they'll just Rauban it straight away, and then use Leviathan whatever they Rauban it with, and then you come out ahead. Okay, not only do you remove their forward from the field, so they have to discard cards to play them again, but you also waste their Rauban, which they've already committed a lot of resource into. They have to commit 4 CP to put it into play, and so, that's a big swing for you. If you can bait your opponent into Raubaning your Garnet, which 90% of the time Earth players will do, then you pretty much are ahead significantly. That's what you gotta do. Keep it in mind. Just plan ahead and do that. And that's going to be your biggest way to get back in the game. In addition to this, again, Cagnazzo is just very relevant in most matchups, but this matchup is significantly more relevant simply because he's able to tank up a lot of damage. If you get a Waka down, and you have a Cagnazzo on the field, he's able to block 9,000 power forward. So your opponent has to use additional combat pumps to deal with him. If you have a Mimu down, that means your opponent has to deal one block of 10,000 or more. So if your opponent doesn't have ways to buff their guys anymore, Cagnazzo is just going to be sitting there and blocking. Against the Vincent Yuffie combo, your best friends are going to be STEINER, Zidane, simply because there are plenty of times where Vincent will want to death penalty you, and while you have STEINER and Zidane on the field, he can't death penalty both of them. So spending 5 CP and discarding a Vincent from hand to kill either Zidane or either STEINER is actually really, really weak. So in general, these are going to be your main fighting forwards. Have both of them down. Neither of them are like relevant enough to DP. And so neither are relevant enough to DP. Neither of them are relevant enough to death penalty. And so, yeah, you can use them to sort of fight against Vincent's. So yeah, generally try to avoid getting two free CP forwards back, onto the field, simply because that's a good coupling of death penalty targets. And generally your second free CP forward is also going to be pretty strong, in the sense that it's probably going to be a Garnet or an Ash, and they're both good targets for Vincent to death penalty. Also, do note that Lenna is also a very good target for Vincent to deal with, so he can get rid of your Lenna and your Knight at the same time. So do be careful against Vincent. If your opponent has a live Vincent, do not play Lenna, because that's just asking for trouble. Most importantly, have to play around Shantotto. Never be in a situation where you have more than 3 forwards, unless you're just pushing, unless you're going to push for game that turn. Simply because if you don't kill them that turn, your opponent's going to Shantotto you. They'll Shantotto you, kill your entire board, and you have to, build it back up again. That being said, there are ways to play around it. Shantotto is a 7-cost backup and requires a backup space. So your opponent can't go 5 backups and 1 discard. So your opponent will always have to discard at least 2 cards to play Shantotto. So if you do the maths, if your opponent has 2 or 1 backups, they're going to have to tap 1 backup and discard 3 cards from hand in order to play Shantotto. So during your turn, if your opponent has 2 cards in hand and 2 backups or 1 backup in hand, if you play Light Sedate and force them to discard, you guarantee them from not being able to play Shantotto the following turn, because they'll draw 2 cards and then they'll have 1 backup or 2 backups and 2 cards in hand. They can't put the Shantotto down. So there'll be times when you have a board and you can play a Light Sedate to force them from 2 down to 1 card. So they probably will keep the Shantotto in hand, but it prevents them from being able to play Shantotto that following turn. And so it just buys you an extra turn. And then your opponent has to think whether they want to play responses, whether they want to play forwards, or whether they want to hold the cards for Shantotto. And so yeah, so this is very relevant. If your opponent has 3 backups in hand, and you can, if your opponent has 3 backups in hand, and 1 card, you can just, of course, use Zidane to force out their hand. So this is a situation where if you have a board, Light Zidane typically is used to force cards out of your opponent's hand. And if your opponent's low on cards, which most of the time Earth decks will be low on cards because they're committing so many cards to play their 4-cost forwards onto the field, you can force them to discard cards, and that's going to set them back, and it's going to make it more difficult for them to play stuff like Shantotto and so on. Against other Earth matchups that play, say, the Zombie Tactics Earth deck, such as that plays the Legendary Prish or plays Scarmiglione, again, UNH is going to be very relevant here in that by removing them from the field, instead of putting them into a break zone, they don't trigger their zombie abilities come back onto the field, as well. So typically a lot of 6 costs, a lot of players who play 6 cost Prish, they'll put it down, they have to discard a lot of cards to put it in. You put down a UNH immediately, bounce back to hand, so that's a big tempo swing within itself, and then you attack with forwards, and then all of a sudden they can't play that Prish again, simply because it's significantly less valuable, all round. So this is another thing you have to consider when playing against the Earth deck. It definitely feels like it's a hard matchup because you have to definitely play smart against it, and you have to sort of fit the little pieces of your deck together in order to overcome their forwards. But it's manageable after you know how to play against it. The big thing, if you are in a meta that has a lot of Earth decks in it, test against it, practice against it. You need to build confidence against it. If you do not practice and build confidence against it, you will lose 90% of the time, simply because Earth is a very simple deck to play. You just get 2 cards, discard them, put a 4/2 down, whether it's a Vincent Yuffie or Yang Ursula. It's very simple in terms of its strategy. Not to say that there is a nuance to it, but it's it's a lot simpler to aggress Earth than to counter with water. So you definitely have to play smart, and you have to practice the matchup and know how to deal with that aggression. So moving on to metagame decisions. So depending upon your local metagame, there are certain tweaks that you can put to this deck in order to better suit you for those matchups more favorably. So if your metagame has a lot more lightning or fire or wind as well, so a lot of these decks run ping effects. So in that situation, I would switch out one of your copies of Ico for a third Minwu. So instead of going 2 Ico, 2 Minwu, go 1 Ico, 3 Minwu. So Minwu is going to be the 3-cost CP backup that you do prioritize, but you still have 1 copy of Ico, meaning that if you do want to search for it with STEINER, you definitely can do that as well. For ice heavy matchups, I would switch out your Beliases for 2 fairies and a Hecaton Care. So Belias is a very flexible card in that it can be used to give your guys haste, give you guys first strike, give them the buff. But against ice, their forwards aren't typically particularly strong, but a lot of them are going to be dulling and freezing your guys. So fairies are going to be very relevant in that it buffs your guys if you have gunned out, it draws you a card, and it reactivates your guys. So it provides a lot of value against ice matchups. And yeah, switching in a second Hecaton Care is mainly for Devout. So Devout is a 4-cost backup that has no immediate effect, but it's, yeah, obviously very strong in that it can get back 4 costs forwards. And it can do it at instant speed. So there will be times where you are doing things during your opponent's turn, and then your opponent will respond by breaking Devout and putting in, say, a Genesis, or putting in a Squall or Laguna or whatever to sort of mess around with you. So in those sort of situations, you want to have a second Hecaton Care, and you want to Hecaton Care the Devouts on your turn, so they can't respond to it, and be able to pull their resources back, because they invest a lot in it, and if you can Hecaton Care out of it, that's a lot of value for you, and it means that they don't have the ability to recur their forwards, 4-cost forwards back on the field. Another thing that's very relevant to note is, with Unit H, remove every forward. Every forward that they play, just remove from the game. You don't want that, like, coming back with Devout, in case you don't have the Hecaton to deal with Devout. If your local metagame is more Earth heavy, I would probably switch out your 3 Tidus L and 1 Zidane S for 2 Tidus R and 2 Cecil R. So the reasoning for this is that Tidus L is a card that does require a little bit more setup, and Zidane S can sometimes put you in a situation where your deck bricks out a little bit. So in Earth, you want to be playing fast. You want to be able to match your opponent's aggression, and you want to be able to deal with their forwards. Sometimes the extra Zidane makes the deck a little bit clunky, which in other matchups is fine, but against Earth, you really want to get the ball rolling as soon as possible. Tidus is a little bit fragile, so we get him out. We get 2 Tidus R, and the reason why we have Tidus R is because his base power is 8,000 power. With Waka's 9,000, that's pretty good already. When he attacks, he gives all your water forwards plus 1,000. And so, in against a lot of Earth decks, you're going to be fighting power to power. So having a Tidus that can attack for 10,000 and then makes all your other water forwards plus 1,000 is really strong in this regard. So yeah, Tidus R is probably what I would switch in for more Earth heavy base decks. And 2 copies of Cecil R, simply because Cecil R forces your opponent to choose Cecil for their abilities and summons. So this means that your opponent no longer is able to use monks and no longer able to use golems because they have to target your Cecil. So in these situations, I would switch in the Tidus R and the Cecil R. For aggro heavy matchups, I would switch out Zidane and a Knight, again because Zidane can brick your deck a little bit, and switch out a Knight because it's a more endgame card to put in 2 Clouds of Darknesses. Against aggro heavy decks, if you can get a Cloud of Darkness down when they have, say, 3 or even 4 forwards, you can just clear out a lot of their steam very quickly straight away. So, in the early game, you'll play some forwards like Fame and Goku to try to sort of deal with their aggression. They will use removal, they will use ways to get around it, to dull it, to freeze it, etc., and they will just quickly build up a board. And they will build up to like 3 or 4 forwards. If they do get greedy and then play the Izana and then play a Black Chocobo to try to like push out the game, they're usually going to have 3 or 4 forwards on that field at the time. You play Cloud of Darkness, wipe them all away except for 1, and now you're good. You've got a Cloud of Darkness for defense, or like if you have another forward for defense, you can keep that around, and they've got 1 forward, and they've probably got no cards in hand, so all of a sudden you're doing really good resource wise. So against aggro heavy decks, Cloud of Darkness is in straight away. So final tips for the deck. If there's anything that I can sort of really focus on for this deck is don't get tunnel visioned into any particular type of strategy. Don't get tunnel vision on trying to set up like the Cagnazzo Scholar Cagnazzo play, or try to set up a Lenna Knight play, or to try to set up like a Tidus Blitz Ace. The game is constantly changing, and if you sometimes sacrifice too many resources from your other plays by trading off other forwards or taking too much damage, then you sometimes be in a situation where you've given up the opportunity to play these alternative strategies, and your main strategy doesn't come together. The deck is always very fluid, very flexible, so there's a lot of outs that you always have available to you. So with Tidus, sometimes instead of trying to draw really heavily and spending a whole bunch of resources to try to cycle through your deck to get to Blitz Ace, sometimes it's better to just attack with him and use him as a defensive shield. With Lenna and Knight, sometimes it's better, instead of trying to set up like the 5 backup big Knight, sometimes it's better to play Lenna at free CP and to get a Fame and Magogo out. Even though like, you're getting less value out of it, sometimes it's better to, for that situation, get it out early and able to attack and defend rather than trying to hold Lenna for too long. And again, like with Cagnazzo, sometimes it's better to play it in the mid game to just get defender down to get like 1 or 2 points of damage in instead of trying to go for that big combo. So you have to think about what your outs are, how you gotta like plan your strategies out, and depending on what you draw, because the deck does draw a lot and has a lot of ways to cycle through more of the cards, you have to adjust your strategy and your answers depending on what you still have left in deck and what you're drawing. So the important thing to take away is do not get tunnel vision. Be familiar with all the different strategies your deck can get you out with, and be flexible. Don't get tunnel vision. Think about your options, whether it's Tidus, Lenna, Garnet, Cagnazzo, and so on. So yeah, that is our second part to the water deck strategy video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. Yeah, if you guys have any feedback or any ideas, definitely feel free to put them in the comments below or send me a message on Facebook. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Grand J out.